To stay garden food secure through the colder months, let's talk about planting fall crops that you probably still do have time to plant as long as you act now. When it's still hot outside, like it is here in South Carolina, and your summer garden crops are tired or you've already pulled them all out, you might be wanting to just put it all to bed for the winter. Planting crops might be the last thing on your mind, but it's actually the perfect time to get out there and extend your growing season. Fall is actually my favorite time to garden. We'll talk about the things you probably still do have time to get into the ground, how to get them started in the heat if it's still hot where you are, and how to keep them thriving until you're ready to harvest. This time of year, you might be pushing winter thoughts to the back of your mind. I know I do, and sometimes I miss late summer planting windows for crops that take longer to mature, like carrots. Actually, I've just moved and I've started to rebuild my garden, but more on that in a different video because time is of the essence and I wanted to talk about planting now for fall. There are plenty of crops that don't take long to mature, and depending on your growing zone, you probably still have time to get them in. Do you guys remember our garden kitty Kit Kit? If you look really closely behind me, you can see her back there sitting underneath the bird feeder. Anyways, the great things about gardening in the fall are obviously the heat finally letting up, so it's much more comfortable to work outside. And depending on your location, rainfall usually picks up, so there's less pressure to supplement water. There are way less pests, and cold exposure to most cold hardy plants makes them sweeter and tastier. Just the aroma of fall or winter harvested carrots proves this. Carrots are a great fall crop because they definitely taste sweeter after exposure to frost and freezes. Planting them at the end of summer for a fall and winter harvest is economical because they're not taking up valuable space you might want when you're planting in spring for summer crops. Carrots do take a bit of time to mature though, and the key to a late fall or early winter harvest is planting them so they have enough time to fully mature by that time. If they don't, they will overwinter just fine because the plants go dormant. They won't die and they're not going to rot in the ground. They'll just put on rapid growth when it warms up in the spring and they'll mature, but in my opinion, the flavor and texture isn't quite as good in my own experience. If your carrots ideally mature before really cold weather hits, you can leave them in the ground all winter if you want and then harvest as needed as long as your ground doesn't totally freeze, because then obviously it's tough to get them out of the ground when you want to harvest them. The ground though is a natural refrigerator for your carrots. I usually plant Danvers carrots because they're great for canning, but this year I'm trying Scarlet Nantes, which are sweeter than most other types of carrots and they're good for raw eating. They're 65 days to maturity plus the germination time. Carrots and actually many other veggie seeds can be tricky to germinate in the heat because they're barely under the surface of the soil and they need ample moisture to germinate. That top thin layer of soil dries out so quickly, and insulating it helps hold that water in. I made a detailed video about this method last year if you'd like to check that out. I usually like to use boards, but this year I am trying cardboard. I'll plant a few seeds every few inches because being more meticulous now saves a ton of time with thinning carrots later. You water right on top of the boards or the cardboard and check every day for germination because you want to remove the covering as soon as that happens to allow light in for photosynthesis to happen. This one might really surprise you, but zucchini is actually a crop that you can try if you still have time since it matures so quickly. It's a warm season crop though and very sensitive to cold. You'd want to make sure you have enough time to harvest because cold weather kills it instantly. If you live in a northern climate, it's probably too late unless you have seedlings that you've already started indoors to get a jump start on this. So last year I did an experiment and I planted zucchini on September 1st, mostly to plant late and avoid pests like squash vine borers because they're the absolute worst, and it was worth the experiment to see if planting late could completely allow me to avoid them. I did have a harvest, but it's important to remember that you're not going to have the bumper crop that happens in the summertime when you have so much zucchini you don't know what to do with it all. It's definitely a much smaller harvest because of the shorter and cooler days, but like I said, it's worth it if you want to just have enough to hang on to the flavors of summer a little longer and avoid the pests that happen during the summertime. Broccoli is so perfect for fall because it's so prone to pests in the summertime, and that pressure pretty much goes down to zero when it cools down. Some of my best harvests have happened in December here in South Carolina, but that's obviously specific to my growing zone. And if you're in a northern climate, you definitely want to check out your first frost date and days to maturity of your variety. Starting indoors and planting seedlings will give you a head start, which is beneficial, especially if you have a shorter growing season. I have some tiny little seedlings that have just started to come up after I planted last weekend, and hopefully it's not too late, but we'll see what happens. I've definitely planted too late in the past, and my broccoli never had the chance to form heads, and it did over winter, but the harvest wasn't as robust after only some of my plants continued on to grow heads in the spring. I usually grow Bell Star broccoli because it's tolerant to heat and cold, and it has survived temps in the lower 20s, even down to like 15 to 18 degrees in my garden. The only thing to really emphasize here, I think, is cold tolerance, because the plants are definitely tolerant to cold, but they do slow down significantly when days shorten, and they just really need time to start forming heads before that happens. Broccoli does require full sun, and that sun intensity lessens as fall and winter approach. When the broccoli heads are slowly growing during frost and freezes, they sweeten up just like carrots, and since they're ready all at once, and if you can't eat it all, it's one of the easiest crops to preserve because you basically just steam it for a few minutes and freeze. Another crop I have growing in this bed right here, and you can see the tiny little seedlings that have just started to come up, is early wonder tall top beets. They're a great choice if you like beet greens because they're ready in as little as a month after germination. Beets do like cooler soil temps for germination, so it can be tricky to get them to germinate in the heat if it's still hot where you are. Covering the rows to help the soil cool down a bit and hold in moisture like with carrots can definitely help. The beets themselves are ready in around 60 or so days after germination, sometimes a little bit longer with those shortened days. But I found that direct sowing in early September is pretty much the cutoff in my location, where our first average frost date window is around November 1st to around November 10th. So I've only grown peas in the spring in my garden, but the heat sets in pretty quickly where I am, and then that halts their growth. So this year I wanted to give them a try in the fall. I have some little tiny seedlings just starting to take off right here, and they're gonna grow up and over this trellis, hopefully. I saved some purple Beauregard snow peas from my garden this past spring that I'm gonna try, and I'm also trying sweet gem snap peas, which are 60 to 65 days to maturity after germination. In case you've ever wondered about the difference between snow peas and snap peas, the biggest difference I've noticed is that snow peas taste delicious sauteed, and snap peas are delicious raw by themselves or in salads. Both can tolerate light frost in the garden, but they do need to be planted early enough to give them time to give you plentiful harvest before hard frost and freezes arrive. Just like beans though, their seeds are so easy to save and plant, and I figure that if I don't have a huge harvest of peas this fall, at least I can save some of the seeds I do get and then plant them in the spring. We definitely need to talk about fall and winter salads, which are just as satisfying, if not more so, than spring and summer salads. Lettuce is so easy to grow in the late summer into fall and even through the winter. With pest pressures reducing almost down to nothing and the fact that lettuce loves cooler weather, you can grow the more delicate varieties that you normally wouldn't attempt in the summertime. I shift from the slow bolt heat tolerant varieties to ones like Yankee Hardy lettuce blend, which I just planted in this bed, and that is more resistant to downy mildew. I'll be growing this under my portable hoop house, hopefully over my raised bed throughout the winter, and in that environment the risk for downy mildew is higher. I'm also growing a beautiful gourmet lettuce blend, and I like black-seeded Simpson also because it's more resistant to downy mildew and it can be harvested as early as less than a month for baby leaf lettuce, or you can let it grow to a full-size head. Spinach is another great cool season salad crop that can be planted a little bit later because it really does prefer cooler temps from germination and beyond. I planted a little bit of it now. You can see my little seedlings coming up here, but I'd really like to plant some in grow bags under a portable greenhouse this winter, and I'm pretty excited about giving that a try. Radishes are a quick crop that germinates and matures quickly. I know you can see those growing behind me here, and the timing is always perfect for salads with your lettuces that you harvest as baby leaf after around a month or less after direct sowing. I love the color and the crunch that radishes add to fresh fall salads, and I'm growing these watermelon radishes because the color is absolutely beautiful and they store well going into winter. Varieties like that one that store well are really nice because they can carry you through until you're ready to plant again in the spring if you want to try it for that. Hi, Kit Kit. Yep. Planting timing of all the crops we just talked about depends on your average first frost date. You'll want to check the days to maturity of the varieties you're planting, add the time it takes for germination to that, and then count backwards from your average first frost date. It's so important to remember that everything does grow more slowly when the days shorten, so I'll add a couple of weeks to that time just to account for that. I've noticed this especially when I'm growing lettuce and spinach under a hoop house in the winter time, and the purple lettuces actually are usually green because of less intense sun exposure. To help direct sown cool season crops take off in late summer and early fall while it's still hot and dry, I like to set up a simple irrigation system that provides consistent and deep watering. Drip irrigation and timers are your best friend. It's been really dry in my new garden's microclimate since we moved in about a month ago now, which isn't unusual in our area during late summer and early fall. We might actually get some real rain this weekend though from the hurricane, so I think these crops that I just planted are really going to start to take off. Like I mentioned earlier, covering your seed rows with boards, cardboard, or even something like burlap can help the soil hold on to moisture and even help cool it down until those seeds germinate. I've actually taken the temperature of the soil underneath boards in my raised beds before during the heat of a sunny day, and the soil was 10 to 15 degrees cooler under those boards than the uncovered spots were. And I should also mention that mulching helps no matter what time of year it is because it helps protect and cool down the soil, and then of course helps it hold on to moisture. When temperatures really start to dip to below freezing, frost blankets and portable hoop houses or greenhouses definitely help extend the growing season. I'm planning on making more videos about this as the season progresses. There is one more crop that you probably still have time to plant, and it'll be in the ground for up to 9 months. You can probably already guess what it is, and it deserves a whole video dedicated to itself. I've made several on my channel so far. You're right. It's garlic, and if you haven't ordered your seed garlic yet, you most likely can still find some online. Stay tuned because I'd love to hang out with you in my new garden as I plant my garlic in mid-October. This right here is saved from the harvest earlier this year, and there's still plenty to eat, and it usually stores until close to the time to harvest the next crop, but I saved lots of good-sized, pretty heads for planting. If it's too late in your area to plant those longer maturing cool season crops, don't worry. You can always try some of the faster growing options we discussed, and worst case, you'll learn a ton about your garden's microclimate and the best planting times for the future. For a bit of fun, check out this older video where our South Carolina garden braved 3-degree temperatures. I'm excited to grow with you this fall and through the winter, and I've got some exciting plans to help extend the growing season, so stay tuned and let's keep growing together.